In 2019, a 28-year-old Filipino martial artist named Miguel Santos travels to São Paulo, Brazil, on a quiet teaching assignment, bringing Arnis, the ancient Filipino martial art, to a small academy on the city's outskirts. One evening, he is invited to demonstrate his craft to some of Brazil's finest fighters at a converted warehouse gym. What should be a respectful cultural exchange quickly turns into a public confrontation when Rodrigo Silva, an undefeated Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion known as the Anaconda, mocks Miguel and his rattan sticks in front of a crowd with phones raised. Rodrigo is everything the modern fighting world celebrates: 6 feet 2 inches, 215 pounds, 13 wins, 10 submissions, 0 losses. Miguel, calm and unhurried, declines to trade insults. He simply agrees to 3 minutes of light sparring. The size difference is dramatic. The crowd expects a quick lesson. But what they witness instead is a masterclass in the wisdom that old arts carry: timing, distance, and angles, principles as relevant on the mat as they are with a stick in hand. This is a story about respect between cultures, about what gets lost when tradition is dismissed, and about two warriors who, by the end of the night, discover they have far more to teach each other than either expected. São Paulo never sleeps, and it never stops testing you. The city sprawls across the Brazilian plateau like a concrete ocean, 30,000 streets, 20 million people, and somewhere in that noise, a heartbeat for combat that pulses in every gymnasium, every favela, every academy where a young fighter wraps his hands before the sun comes up. It was 2019 when a quiet young man named Miguel Santos stepped off a bus on the western edge of the city and looked around at a neighborhood that smelled like diesel and rain-wet asphalt. He had a backpack, a gym bag, and inside that bag, 2 rattan sticks wrapped in cloth. He was 28 years old. Filipino. And he had come to Brazil not to fight, but to teach. Miguel had been training in Arnis since he was 7 years old. Arnis, sometimes called Eskrima or Kali, is the national martial art of the Philippines. It is one of the oldest surviving combat systems in the world. Spanish colonizers documented Filipino warriors using it in the 1500s. It survived conquest, war, and decades of cultural erasure to arrive intact in the hands of practitioners like Miguel, who understood that what the sticks really teach is not violence, but wisdom. He had come to São Paulo on a teaching visa arranged by a small Filipino community there. A modest academy. 12 students. 3 weeks. That was the plan. But plans, in a city like São Paulo, tend to get interrupted. On his 3rd week, Miguel received an invitation. A gym on the outskirts of the city, a converted warehouse, the kind with high corrugated ceilings and exposed steel beams, was hosting an informal gathering. Not a tournament. Not a sanctioned event. Just fighters from different disciplines coming together to train, spar, and see what they could learn from one another. The air inside smelled of sweat and liniment oil. The sound of fists hitting heavy bags echoed off the walls like a slow, rhythmic thunderstorm. Cage lights buzzed overhead. Mats covered the center of the floor. Along the walls, Muay Thai practitioners, wrestlers, boxers, and, dominating the center of the room with the easy confidence of a man who has never lost, the fighters of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu school. Miguel adjusted his gym bag near a corner and took in the room. He was smaller than most men there. 5'8". 165 pounds. Lean, precise, with the quiet stillness of someone who has trained long enough to stop needing to prove anything. Tonight, he had been invited to demonstrate Filipino martial arts to some of the best fighters in São Paulo. He did not know, when he walked in, that the night would become something else entirely. He heard the voice before he saw the man. "Hey, look at this." A voice, loud and carrying, aimed to be heard. The Filipino brought his little sticks. Laughter erupted from a group near the cage. Miguel turned slowly. At the center of the group stood Rodrigo Silva. If you followed Brazilian MMA at all in 2019, you knew the name. 6 feet 2 inches tall. 215 pounds, and not an ounce of it wasted. His nickname was the Anaconda, because once Rodrigo wrapped around you, escape was a fantasy. 13 professional MMA fights. 13 wins. 10 by submission. 0 losses. His championship belt tattoo curved over his left shoulder like a crown. Rodrigo walked toward Miguel with the unhurried stride of someone who has never had reason to move out of the way for anyone. He looked at the gym bag. He looked at Miguel. A slow smile crossed his face. What are those, drumsticks? He raised an eyebrow. You going to play us a song before we train? More laughter. Phones came out. This was the kind of moment that lived forever on social media. Miguel reached into his bag and pulled out 2 rattan sticks. He held them with the easy familiarity of someone who has held them 10,000 times. These are training tools for Arnis, he said. Filipino martial arts. I was invited here to Filipino martial arts. Rodrigo cut him off, his voice saturated with the particular condescension of someone who believes they already know everything worth knowing. Bro. We're past that old school stuff. This is 2019. Brazilian jiu-jitsu changed everything. We prove that real fighting happens on the ground. Your stick routines might look cool on YouTube, but in a real fight. He shook his head slowly, as if explaining something to a child. I'd break those sticks in half. Then I'd break you in half. The crowd tightened around them. The heavy bags went quiet. Everyone was watching now. Miguel Santos did not raise his voice. He had been in rooms like this before. Not always in Brazil, not always with a man named Rodrigo, but in gyms across the world where young fighters mistake familiarity with one system for mastery of all truth. He had learned, from his teachers, that the correct response to arrogance is not matching arrogance. It is patience. Arnis is more than sticks, he said simply. The sticks teach principles. Timing. Distance. Angles. Those same principles work empty-handed. Rodrigo's eyes lit up the way a predator's do when prey moves unexpectedly. Empty-handed? He turned to the crowd with the showmanship of a man who knows the cameras are rolling. You want to grapple with me? This guy wants to test his traditional martial arts against Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Who wants to see this? The gym erupted in cheers. Don't kill him too fast, Rodrigo, someone shouted from the back. Miguel set his sticks down carefully on his gym bag. He looked at Rodrigo. 3 minutes. Light sparring. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to show that different arts carry different wisdom. Rodrigo pulled his shirt over his head, revealing a physique that was the product of years of elite-level training. He rolled his shoulders. He smiled. I'm about to give you a very educational experience. They stepped onto the mat, and the size difference was immediate and undeniable. Rodrigo towered over Miguel. His reach advantage alone would be enough to make most fighters think twice. His ground game was among the best in the city. His clinch was a trap. His timing was precise. He was, by every reasonable metric the modern combat sports world had developed, the superior fighter. And Miguel knew it. That is what made what happened next so remarkable. From the moment the sparring began, Miguel did not fight like a man trying to prove something. He moved with the economy of someone who has spent decades not wasting a single motion. He circled. He used angles, stepping offline when Rodrigo advanced, never where the larger man expected him to be. Every time Rodrigo reached to close the distance, he found empty space. The crowd went from cheering to watching. Then from watching to silence. This is the principle that Arnis teaches in its earliest lessons, but that most students take years to truly understand. You do not need to match your opponent's strength. You need to understand his structure. Find the angle where his strength becomes weight, where his reach becomes commitment, where his size stops helping him and starts working against him. Miguel had learned this at 7 years old with sticks in his hands. He now applied it with his body. When Rodrigo finally managed to close the distance and take him to the mat, which he did, because Rodrigo Silva was a world-class grappler, Miguel did not panic. He moved fluidly, used frames, controlled space. He did not escape the way a jiu-jitsu player would. He escaped the way an Arnis practitioner does, by refusing to let any position become permanent, always transitioning, always creating distance. 3 minutes passed. No one had been submitted. No one had been broken. And the room was quiet in a way it had not been when they started. Rodrigo sat back on the mat, breathing harder than he had expected to be. He looked at Miguel. Something had shifted. The performance was over. The cameras were still rolling, but he was no longer performing for them. How did you? He stopped. Started again. Where did you learn to move like that? From a man named Lolo Ramon, Miguel said. My grandfather's teacher. He learned from a man who learned from a man who learned from warriors who used these principles to survive a colonial war. Rodrigo was quiet for a moment. I've never felt someone use angles like that on the ground. I kept reaching for where you were, and you weren't there. That's what the sticks teach, Miguel said. When someone attacks the stick, you're not the stick anymore. You've already moved. The room began to breathe again. A few fighters moved closer, no longer to watch a confrontation, but to listen. Rodrigo stood up. He looked at the rattan sticks resting on the gym bag. Then he looked at Miguel. Show me. It was not a demand anymore. It was a request. And Miguel Santos, 28 years old, 5'8", 165 pounds, picked up his sticks and began to teach. What happened in that São Paulo warehouse in 2019 was not a miracle. It was not magic. It was something far more durable than either of those things. It was the meeting of two traditions that, for a moment, stopped trying to defeat each other and started trying to understand each other. Brazilian jiu-jitsu was born from necessity, from the need of smaller people to survive encounters with larger ones. It was refined over generations by the Gracie family, tested in gyms and streets, and eventually proved itself against every system that challenged it. Its innovations were real. Its contributions to the martial arts world were genuine. Arnis is older. Born in the islands of the Philippines, it was already a sophisticated system when Europeans arrived. It survived 330 years of Spanish colonial rule. It survived American colonization. It survived a law that briefly banned the public practice of martial arts, forcing practitioners to disguise combat training as folk dance. It arrived in 2019 with every lesson of every generation encoded in the movements of its practitioners. Neither tradition needed to destroy the other to survive. They never did. What they needed, what they had always needed, was a room, a mat, and two people willing to stop performing and start listening. Miguel Santos finished his 3 weeks in São Paulo and went home to the Philippines. Rodrigo Silva, in the months that followed, began incorporating footwork principles from Arnis into his own training regimen. He talked about it in interviews. He credited Miguel by name. The video from that night, someone's shaky phone footage, unedited, barely lit, found its way online. It circulated in Filipino martial arts communities first, then wider. Comments filled with practitioners recognizing the movements. Fighters asking questions. People who had never heard of Arnis looking it up for the first time. The sticks had traveled, as they always do, further than any single pair of hands can carry them. Because that is what wisdom does when it is not locked away. It moves. It finds new rooms. It meets new traditions. It does not demand surrender, it offers exchange. In the end, the most powerful thing Miguel Santos brought to that São Paulo warehouse was not a technique. It was not a system. It was not even the sticks. It was patience. And patience, it turns out, is the oldest martial art of all.